Republicans refused to go along, fearing that the Democrats added to the Rules Committee might turn out to be liberal troublemakers. The whole issue went to the Senate floor, where it quickly became apparent that the enlarged Rules Committee plan would not pass. Democratic liberals, knowing that they were beaten, prevented a vote until tomorrow, when they will know the name of the vice presidential nominee. His identity, figure the liberals, could change some votes. During one fast exchange today, Allen of Alabama called the Senate's predicament utterly ridiculous. Assistant Democratic leader Byrd was so offended that Allen got unanimous consent to change it to utterly illogical. Roger Mudd, CBS News, Washington.
In a telegram to the congressional leadership today, CBS President Arthur Taylor urged that the committee action and the floor debate on the vice presidential nominee be open to live television coverage. Calling it an event of great historic importance, Taylor said, only through the eyes of television cameras can the public across the nation witness the performance of their elected representatives in meeting their grave constitutional duties.
Perhaps once or twice in a lifetime, there comes an invention so radical and new, it actually changes the way we live our lives. Television was one. Now Polaroid invents the SX70. Less than 2 seconds after you touch the red electric button, the camera hands you the picture. There's nothing to peel, nothing even to throw away, nothing to time. The image blooms before your eyes, and in minutes you have a finished photograph seemingly as real as life itself. The new SX70 land camera from Polaroid. It can reveal the world to you as you've never seen it before.
In a ruling handed down tonight, the U.S. Court of Appeal said that President Nixon must give up White House tape recordings of Watergate conversations. Fred Graham has the details.
It was a crushing blow to President Nixon's legal position, with the 7-judge court upholding the authority of Judge John Sirica to compel the president to turn over the tapes. There were partial dissents by the 2 Nixon appointees to the court, Malcolm Wilkie and George McKinnon. They objected to the effect of Judge Sirica's order, not his power to consider the case. The unsigned 79-page opinion rejected the 2 basic assertions of President Nixon. The president said the courts lacked the power to order the head of a co-equal branch to do anything. The court declared that it could do so. Mr. Nixon said he alone could decide which of his records are protected from disclosure by the doctrine of executive privilege. The court said to accept this would be refashioning the Constitution, which includes no such presidential privilege. The court did set up a procedure for screening out national security material from the tapes. Otherwise, Judge Sirica was told to hear the tapes in secret and to pass relevant evidence on to the grand jury. The case is expected to go quickly to the Supreme Court, where President Nixon has pledged to obey any definitive decision. Fred Graham, CBS News, Washington.
A government official told a House subcommittee today that President Nixon's personal lawyer and an architect ordered work done at San Clemente and billed it to the government. The testimony by Deputy Commissioner John Gawardi of the General Services Administration involved attorney Herbert Kalmbach and architect Harold Lynch. The work included a $4,400 property survey, an $11,800 heating system, and a $4,300 grounds and pool lighting system. The House has given final congressional approval to a bill limiting the president's power to commit American troops to combat without a declaration of war. The measure, a direct outgrowth of the Indochina War, has been threatened with a veto. And the House vote today, 238 to 123, was 3 short of the 2/3 majority that would be needed to override such presidential action.
Polaroid's new SX70. Just touch the button. Now these pictures, developing themselves outside the camera, are hard and dry. Minutes later, you have finished photographs seemingly as real as life itself. The new SX70 land camera from Polaroid.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thanks.
Say, did you notice Margaret yesterday?
Yes, she seemed quiet.
Definitely not the old Margaret.
Hi, girls.
Margaret!
Say, who wants to go to the dress sale? I hear they have some fantastic buys.
Margaret's problem? Occasional irregularity. But look, she's back in the swing with Haley's M.O. Good-tasting Haley's is a gentle, gentle blend that works. When you need a laxative, get back in the swing with Haley's M.O.
The Mideast War is producing signs of stress in Soviet-American relations. At a news conference today, Secretary of State Kissinger was critical of Soviet pro-Arab conduct in the war, but not too critical. Marvin Kalb reports from Washington.
Kissinger appealed for restraint, moderation, responsibility from the Arabs, the Israelis, most especially from the Russians. He knows that a fairly substantial airlift of Soviet supplies into Syria and Egypt continues, that Moscow has encouraged other Arab states to join the fight. But Kissinger still refuses to assert that East-West détente is threatened.
We did not consider the airlift of military equipment helpful. We also do not consider that Soviet actions as of now constitute the irresponsibility that on Monday evening I pointed out would threaten détente. When that point is reached, we will, in this crisis, as we have in other crises, not hesitate to take a firm stand.
Kissinger hinted that the U.S. has begun to resupply Israeli military losses. Small stuff, not yet planes or tanks. That depends on whether the fighting can be stopped before it gets out of control.
The United States would believe that a prolonged war of attrition in the Middle East would have such a high possibility of great power involvement, at least great power involvement in the sense of increasing the tensions to a point which would affect the entire international atmosphere, and raise issues of supplies to both sides in such a manner that we believe it is in the interest of all countries, including also and above all the participants, to bring the war to a reasonable and honorable conclusion as soon as that can be accomplished.
It's clear Kissinger is not yet ready to criticize the Russians too strongly or too openly. But it's equally clear that unless the Russians soon begin to restrain the Syrians and the Egyptians and be helpful in producing some kind of ceasefire resolution at the UN, then the whole structure of East-West détente may be in trouble. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, the State Department.
The helicopter carrier Iwo Jima, with 1,800 U.S. Marines on board, is being sent to the Mediterranean to join another shipload of Marines already on station there. The Soviet news agency TASS says a Russian merchant ship, the Ilya Meshnikov, was sunk by Israeli missiles during a naval raid on the Syrian port of Tartus. The Soviet report warns Israel of grave consequences for such acts.
Are you getting burned by your present homeowner's insurance? Are your claims settled quickly with courteous personal service? Are you paying for the wrong coverage? You better find out. See your independent insurance agent. He's on your side. He'll select a policy from a number of insurance companies. That way you'll get just the protection you need at a fair cost. Get this free booklet from your professional independent insurance agent wherever you see this symbol.
Scott's Liquid Gold has the perfect answer. Their new countertop and stainless steel cleaner. Just spray it on. Wipe it dry. You won't believe how it cleans off dust, grease, water stains, fingerprints. Clean, polished, and looking like new again. Try the newest member of our family, Scott's Liquid Gold countertop and stainless steel cleaner.
In the Middle East war again tonight, the Sinai front's fairly quiet, and the major action is on the Syrian front. Israeli troops broke through the Syrian defense lines in the hills east of the Golan Heights and raced toward Damascus earlier today. They apparently met heavy opposition, however, and by late today, the Israeli High Command was saying that their troops were advancing slowly and surely. Field accounts differ as to exactly how far the lead elements of the Israeli armored column have gotten, but apparently it's around the town of Sa'asa, just halfway down the road to Damascus from the kickoff point, the old ceasefire line, and 10 miles from Katana, the big Syrian military base up in here. Other Israeli armored columns were said to be pushing down side roads to widen the front from the ceasefire line out here. The Syrians say that there is very heavy fighting along the entire front, and they say tonight that they have stopped the Israelis and have begun pushing them back. But they also say that they're still fighting in the town of Kenitra, and the Israelis say they cleared that town 2 days ago. Their air battles over Syria, all over the area, were fierce. Israel claimed to have shot down 29 Arab jets. Syria claimed 19 Israeli planes. Now let's look at today's film reports from the Syrian front. First, Peter Kalischer with the Israelis.
Israeli Centurion tanks split into 3 attacking columns today, widening as well as deepening the advance into Syria. Overhead, their overworked phantoms pounded behind enemy lines. This road through the Golan Heights saw the high watermark of the Syrian attack. It's now a museum graveyard of Syrian armor as well as men. Tanks, personnel carriers, anti-aircraft guns, all wrecked. Artillery from both sides continued their duel, the Syrians firing from as far as 20 miles away. The incoming was scattered but persistent, and they caused casualties. Kenitra, the once so-called Syrian capital of the Golan Heights, occupied by Israel after the 1967 war and briefly recaptured by Syrians last Sunday, is once more in Israeli hands. A ghost town just a little more battered than it was.
Rolling well beyond the ceasefire line, Israeli armor and troops take the road for Damascus.
Where are you going? North. It's a bitterly contested road, but the Israelis say that taking Damascus will be a political decision, not a military one. And tonight, they were within 20 miles of that Syrian capital. Peter Kalischer, CBS News, with the Israeli forces in Syria.
The Israeli warplanes came in low over the water, and then they found their targets. First, straight in and right over the main building of this $37 million power plant. It used to provide 20% of the power for Syria's national grid. Now it is useless because of 2 Israeli air attacks. Then they hit this oil refinery at Homs, which is directly linked by pipeline to the oil fields of Iraq. The loss is total. It is certain to affect the cost of gasoline in Europe and America, say the experts here. Then, closer to Damascus, on the outskirts, near the airport, the Israeli planes destroyed this oil depot, a staggering loss to the Syrian Air Force.
The Syrians responded with the SAM, the Russian-built surface-to-air missile which was so successful in North Vietnam. Yesterday, the Syrians claimed to have shot down 18 Israeli warplanes over Damascus. Today, they say they've shot down another 16 Israeli planes over Damascus. I saw 4 go down yesterday, 5 today.
At all the targets, there were people, mostly civilians. Here at the National Hospital in Homs, the wounded numbered at least 200. The doctors here said about half would be crippled for life. They bore the coffin of one young student out to a bus to carry his body to his village. And there was struggle to get it safely aboard. Then the dead student's friends chanted, "There is no God but Allah. The martyr is beloved by Allah. Our land will be regained with our blood." Dean Braylis, CBS News, Homs, Syria.
American military experts believe the Israeli strategy is to knock Syria out of the war and then turn full attention to the Egyptians in the Sinai. Today, the influential Cairo editor, Mohammed Heikel, warned his readers of hard times ahead, despite initial successes. Today, the Egyptians claim they killed 200 Israelis and destroyed 13 tanks and 19 personnel carriers in a battle somewhere in the central sector of the Sinai Desert. They also claim they destroyed 2 Israeli radar stations elsewhere in the Sinai and a 3-boat missile flotilla in the Gulf of Suez. The Israelis make no mention of any such engagements. Tom Fenton sends this report from the Israeli side of the Sinai front.
This is as far as you can go on the road to Kantara. Only a few miles beyond are the Egyptian lines. For the moment, while the battle rages in the north, the Suez front is relatively quiet with sporadic artillery duels and airstrikes. The Egyptian Air Force struck here earlier today. But before long, this is likely to be the scene of heavy fighting, and not for the first time. This road was once the ancient Via Maris, the road from Egypt to Syria. The armies of the Ptolemies and Caesars marched up and down this road. The modern Egyptian army advanced up it in 1948 and was beaten by the Israelis. The Israelis advanced down it in 1956 and 1967 and won. Now the Israelis are digging in for another big battle with their ancient enemies. There are chores to be done after a week in the Sinai.
To the Skyhawk, you better tell your president we need much more of this. We can take phantoms too.
And while Israeli soldiers wait along their new defense line, there's time for that most delicious of all luxuries in the Sinai Desert, a shower. Tom Fenton, CBS News, in the Sinai.
Some film from the Egyptian side of the line a little later in the broadcast. The Egyptians claim 85 civilians were killed and 100 more wounded yesterday in an Israeli air raid on a highway bridge about 20 miles north of Cairo. The government today unveiled its program to ration wholesale distribution of home heating oil. Effective November 1st, wholesalers will be allowed as much oil as they purchased last year, but 10% of their supplies must be held out for distribution by state governments in hardship cases. The program also will apply to jet and diesel fuel. The airlines were told to decide jointly what flights they could eliminate, and pending that decision, TWA announced it was cutting off 5% of its domestic flights. In power-short Oregon, Governor McCall today proposed extending Christmas vacations of elementary and secondary schools to a full month to save fuel. The Agriculture Department today said that although the 1973 corn crop will be a record, it will not be enough to keep up with demand. The crop's now expected to be about 5 million bushels less than predicted last month, and agriculture says this means the U.S. cannot meet export demands and still supply all the basic grain needed for domestic meat, milk, and poultry production. This could mean a further dip in U.S. grain reserves, but agriculture officials were not available to say whether it could also force a cutback in exports. The Dow Jones Industrials gained 2.5 points in a busy Friday on the New York Stock Exchange. Volume was 22,700,000 shares. The average price per share was up 15 cents on the New York Exchange, 13 cents on the American. In Grosse Isle, Michigan yesterday, Mrs. Sally Helmley chartered a small plane saying she wanted to take her 3 young daughters up to see the autumn foliage. But police say that once airborne, Mrs. Helmley seized control of the plane and sought to crash it. In the ensuing struggle with pilot Robert Sayers, she allegedly stabbed him 6 times with a pair of knives. Sayers safely landed the craft, however. Today he's in satisfactory condition and she's under detention in a hospital. The children were unhurt.
Morning, neighbor. Join us for breakfast?
Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Start right with Total.
Start eating right and watching your weight with Total. Each delicious ounce gives you 100% of the minimum daily adult requirement of vitamins and iron.
Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Start right with Total.
If you're over 40, here's an important discovery for your eyes. Clear eyes for eyes over 40. You see, science knows by 40 your eyes can lose half their youthful moisture, so may strain easier, hurt more. But Clear Eyes has an exclusive moisturizing formula with methylcellulose. Helps relieve dryness, soothe irritation in eyes over 40. Clear Eyes, a special moisturizing formula for eyes over 40. Read the label. Use as directed.
For 3 days now, 5 Midwest states and Texas have suffered through heavy rains and flooding that has left at least 11 persons dead and thousands homeless. Officials fear the death toll may climb as rescue workers search for the missing. Enid, Oklahoma was hardest hit with 7 persons known dead. About 16 inches of rain fell on Enid in less than 24 hours. In Texas, 2 persons drowned at Austin, and at Mejia, 2 children were swept away by rising river waters. An Environmental Protection Agency survey of the 50 states shows the states estimate it will cost them more than $60 billion to build needed wastewater treatment facilities by 1990. But EPA Administrator Russell Train said the survey is still incomplete and that the figure may be exaggerated. He suggested Congress consider $36.5 billion a more realistic target. The government today ordered that in 6 months, all the nation's bakeries must double the iron content of enriched white bread. The Food and Drug Administration said the order is necessary, quote, because a significant number of people are getting less and less iron and becoming anemic. But some doctors criticized the order as a dangerous experiment. One said excessive iron can cause cirrhosis of the liver and pancreas, diabetes, heart failure, and impotence in males. In another action, the FDA said that after March 31st, 1975, cosmetics manufacturers will be required to list on labels all of the ingredients in their products except fragrances and flavors. Earlier this week, the Egyptians took a group of Western correspondents, including our Bob Allison, on a tour of their bridgehead on the eastern side of the Suez Canal. Allison found the Egyptians apparently came to stay. His filmed report, which follows, was cleared by Egyptian censors.
Our trip started at the southern end of the canal, where we crossed over one of the many pontoon bridges with which the Egyptians have now spanned the waterway. 2 half-track vehicles were just in front of us as we crossed over. Once over, and after we cleared the slight rise, which was all that was left of the bar-lev line there, an astonishing sight came into view. We went 5, perhaps 7 or 8 miles into the desert, but the Egyptians would take us no closer. We saw and heard from there enough action to give us a picture of what was happening. Less than 4 miles away, we saw an Egyptian truck convoy come under attack by Israeli planes. After several bombing runs, we could see that the convoy was still advancing, was still intact. The most spectacular part of the trip was the return. By then, our pontoon bridge, the one on which we had crossed, was under artillery attack. There were several shells that came in during the half hour we spent there, but none of them came closer than a quarter of a mile to the bridge. The Egyptians keep their bridges concealed from aircraft most of the time by a smoke screen. At the time we crossed back over, Egyptian vehicles were moving in the other direction at the rate of 1 every minute. It was clear that the Egyptians are having, at least in this area, no trouble in getting all the men and equipment they want across the canal. If the Israelis start a counterattack, they are going to come up against a huge Egyptian army that now has control of the land they once held. And across the canal on Egypt's western desert, there is an even greater reserve of men and armor. Bob Allison, CBS News, Cairo.
And that's the way it is, Friday, October 12th, 1973. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
What's wrong, honey?
This itching. It's driving me nuts.
Now try Lanacaine.
Okay.
Lanacaine's great for itching, and it really works fast. I know. Feel better?
Thanks, honey. Feel great. That Lanacaine's amazing.
Amazing Lanacaine works fast to stop itching for hours.
I've got a secret in my refrigerator. It's there, way in back. See? An open box of Arm & Hammer baking soda. It actually absorbs food odors. Whether you have cheese, onions, broccoli, even fish, it'll keep your refrigerator sweeter, cleaner, and fresher smelling. At the end of 2 months, put in a new box and pour the old box down a drain to help make it clean smelling. Arm & Hammer baking soda. A nice little secret for your refrigerator.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. George Bush, chairman of the Republican National Committee, will be the guest this Sunday on Face the Nation. President Nixon will address the nation tonight at 9, 8 Central Time. The Friday night movie, Dracula, has been rescheduled to a later date. In its place, Dan August, tonight, here on CBS.
Here's another outstanding Ward Week value. Willie Moscone has been sinking shots like these for years on slate bed tables costing thousands. Can he still make the long ones using Ward's 8-foot home pool table? It doesn't cost thousands, but it too has a rock-steady, natural slate bed. Willie Moscone is a hard man to beat, and beating Ward's low price of $379.88 is even tougher.
The Great Western feeling. You'll find it all over California. Great Western has more offices to serve you than any other savings association. And so much more. It's the feeling that comes from knowing you put your savings in exactly the right place. That's the Great Western feeling.
KNXT Channel 2.
President Nixon is about to announce his choice for vice president. I'll have reaction on the big news at 7 o'clock, immediately following coverage of the president's address.
This is a special report from CBS News in Washington, where the president is about to name his candidate for vice president. Here is CBS News correspondent Barry Serafin.
This is the East Room of the White House, where history is to be made tonight. In a few moments, President Nixon will announce his nominee for vice president to replace Spiro Agnew, the first vice president of the United States to resign under protest. Mr. Agnew handed in his resignation Wednesday and entered a plea of no contest to a tax evasion charge, ending a 2-month-long bitter battle with the Justice Department. Members of Congress, the Cabinet, and the Diplomatic Corps have been invited to hear the President's speech tonight. Suspense and considerable speculation have grown through the day concerning the President's possible choice for Mr. Agnew's successor, a choice that must be approved by a majority of both houses of Congress. Mr. Nixon moved quickly to fill the vacuum left by Spiro Agnew's resignation. Mr. Nixon asked hundreds of prominent Republicans for their recommendations and took that long list to his Camp David, Maryland retreat last night. He reportedly narrowed the list to 5 finalists, then made his choice this morning, shortly before returning to the White House. Senate Republican leader Hugh Scott, who met with the president today, says he does not know the nominee's name, but quotes Mr. Nixon as saying it is a name that may not leap to mind at first thought, but an individual who would be well received by Congress.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President's Cabinet.
New Secretary of State Henry Kissinger leading members of the Cabinet into the East Room at the White House. Behind him, Treasury Secretary Schultz.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the President pro tem of the Senate, the Minority Leader of the Senate, and the Majority and Minority Leaders of the House of Representatives.
Carl Albert leading congressional leaders into the East Room. Mr. Albert serving in the interim as former Vice President Agnew's replacement. Now members of the family are entering the East Room. Tricia Nixon Cox, Julia Nixon Eisenhower, David Eisenhower. Standing right in front of the President's cabinet. Everyone is waiting for the big moment, and indeed there has been plenty of suspense. The secret of the President's choice has been so well kept that according to her secretary this afternoon, not even Mrs. Nixon knew who the nominee was. Everyone is standing now waiting for the President to enter.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Nixon.
Now the President of the United States.
Members of the Cabinet, members of the Congress, members of the Diplomatic Corps, all of our distinguished guests here in the East Room, and my fellow Americans. I have invited you here tonight so that I could share with all of you, not only in this room, but the millions listening on television and radio, my announcement of the man whose name I shall submit to the Congress tomorrow for confirmation as Vice President of the United States. I shall ask the Congress tonight, and also when I submit the name tomorrow, to act as expeditiously as possible on this nomination because of the great challenges we face at home and abroad today. We live at a time in which we face great dangers, but also a time of very great opportunities. We can be thankful tonight that for the first time in 12 years, the United States is at peace with every nation of the world. We can also be thankful that we are in the midst of a rising expansion of our economy in which more Americans have better jobs at higher wages than at any time in the history of our country. But also on the other side, we have to recognize the fact that the peace that we have worked so hard to build not only for ourselves but for all the world is now threatened because of a new outbreak of war in the Mideast. And also, we must recognize the fact that the prosperity that we seek is plagued by an inflation which is a burden on the family budget of millions of Americans. This is a time, therefore, that we need strong and effective leadership, because the hope of the world for peace lies with the leadership that we have here in the United States of America. And our ability to build a new prosperity in this country, a prosperity without war and without inflation, lies in the need for strong leadership in the United States of America. Never in our history has the world more needed a strong America, a united America, with both the power and the will to act in the spirit that made this a great country and that has kept it a free country. And that is why, at this particular time, it is vital that we turn away from the obsessions of the past and turn to the great challenges of the future. This is a time for a new beginning for America. A new beginning in which we all dedicate ourselves to the tasks of meeting the challenges we face, seizing the opportunities for greatness, and meeting the dangers wherever they are, at home or abroad. And I'm confident tonight, as I stand here before leaders of both parties, I'm confident we shall meet those dangers and also seize those opportunities. I am confident that we shall do so But we can and will do so only if we have the support of millions of our fellow Americans all across this land. We can and will do so only if we have bipartisan support in the Congress of the United States in matters in which no partisanship should ever enter. And we can and will do so only if we have strong, effective leadership in the executive branch of this government. These were the considerations that I had in mind as I considered what man or other individual to select as the nominee for Vice President of the United States. Let me tell you what the criteria were that I had in mind. First, and above all, the individual who serves as Vice President must be qualified to be President. And second, the individual who serves as Vice President of the United States must be one who shares the views of the President on the critical issues of foreign policy and national defense, which is so important if we are to play our great role, our destined role, to keep peace in the world. And third, at this particular time when we have the executive in the hands of one party and the Congress controlled by another party, it is vital that the Vice President of the United States be an individual who can work with members of both parties in the Congress in getting approval for those programs of the administration which we consider are vital for the national interest. It was these criteria that I had in mind when I pondered this decision last night and early this morning in the quiet beauty of Camp David. And the man I have selected meets those three criteria. First, he is a man who has served for 25 years in the House of Representatives with great distinction.
The President is talking about Gerald Ford, Minority Leader in the House.
Ladies and gentlemen, please don't be premature. There are several here who served 25 years in the House of Representatives. In addition to that service in the House, I should point out that in that period of time, he has earned the respect of both Democrats and Republicans. He is a man also who has been unwavering in his support of the policies that brought peace with honor for America in Vietnam, and in support of a policy for a strong national defense for this country, which is so essential if we are to have peace in the world. And above all, he is a man who, with the responsibilities of the great office that I hold, should fall upon him, as has been the case with 8 vice presidents in our history. We could all say the leadership of America is in good hands. Our distinguished guests and my fellow Americans, I proudly present to you the man whose name I will submit to the Congress of the United States for confirmation as the Vice President of the United States, Congressman Gerald Ford of Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Ford knows the rules that since he now has to be confirmed by both houses, his remarks will be very brief.
Well, Mr. President, I'm deeply honored, and I'm extremely grateful, and I'm terribly humble. But I pledge to you, Mr. President, and I pledge to my colleagues in the Congress, and I pledge to the American people that to the best of my ability, if confirmed by my colleagues in the Congress, that I will do my utmost to the best of my ability to serve this country well and to perform those duties that will be my new assignment as effectively and as efficiently and with as much accomplishment as possible. Mr. President, with pride, I have supported our country's policies, both at home and abroad, aimed at seeking peace worldwide and a better well-being for all of our citizens throughout our great land. And I will continue to work with you and with the Congress in the further implementation of those policies in the months and years ahead. It seems to me that we want in America a united America. I hope I have some assets that might be helpful in working with the Congress and doing what I can throughout our country to make America a united America. And I pledge to you my full efforts, and I pledge the same to my colleagues and to the American people. Thank you very much.
Nominee for Vice President Gerald Ford, joined by his wife, Mrs. Nixon, joining the President at the podium, receiving a rounding applause from the audience. Now leaving the East Room.
Green Room. I know that all of you will want to meet Congressman Ford and Mrs. Ford, and we will be in the Blue Room if you would like to come by and say hello, congratulate them. And also, there will be refreshments, I understand, in the State Dining Room in case some of you didn't have supper. Thank you. Thank you and good evening. Thank you.
So now it's known, Congress will be asked to confirm one of its own, House Minority Leader Gerald Ford of Michigan, as Vice President of the United States to succeed Spiro Agnew, who resigned Wednesday. There will be plenty of congratulations around the White House tonight from Ford's colleagues. In summary of what President Nixon had to say tonight,
and CBS News will present an analysis tomorrow night on the CBS Evening News. The president began by asking Congress to act expeditiously on his nomination. He said it's vital that we turn away from obsessions of the past. He said it's time for a new beginning. Gerald Ford receiving congratulations in that throng of well-wishers at the White House. The president said he had 3 criteria for his nominee. He must be qualified to be president, must share the views of the president on foreign policy and national defense, and must be able to work with members of both parties in Congress. He said his nominee has served for 25 years in the House of Representatives with great distinction, and before he could say his name, his colleagues, Ford's colleagues, were on their feet applauding him, and congratulations. The president also said of Gerald Ford, if presidential duties fell to him, the leadership of America would be in good hands. As for Congressman Ford, he pledged to serve his country well if confirmed. He said he was proud to support President Nixon's policies, and he pledged to make this a united America. Those in the East Room now filing to other rooms in the White House to gather and talk and discuss the news, which apparently was a surprise to almost everyone in the room tonight. We'll be back in a moment with a detailed look at the new choice for vice president and reaction to his nomination.
This has been a special report from CBS News. In just 1 minute, the president's choice, a closer examination of tonight's nomination of Representative Gerald Ford. This is CBS.
I'm Yogi Berra, and I believe in haircuts.
We're Yogi Berra's sons, and we believe in hair.
I believe in tradition.
And we think things need a lot of changing.
Take Yogi's advice. Stay on the ball.
Take Yogi's son's advice. Have yourself a ball.
Jockey brand white underwear.
Jockey brand color underwear.
White.
Color.
White.
Color.
White.
Color.
Where did I go wrong?
Have you ever been tempted, I mean really tempted, to be with any man besides your husband?
From time to time, I have.
ABC TV said topical, intelligent, and perceptive. It's a film about that growing group of married couples who still resist the idea of an open marriage, but who like to try leaving it ajar.
I Could Never Have Sex, now playing citywide. KNXT Channel 2.
And now, from Washington, the President's Choice, a CBS News special report on tonight's nomination of Representative Gerald Ford. Here is CBS News correspondent Barry Serafin.
Well, the suspense is over here in Washington, and it's been a day full of suspense and ever-widening speculation about who the president's choice might be as successor for Spiro Agnew, who resigned Wednesday as vice president. He announced tonight that choice is Gerald Ford of Michigan, House Minority Leader. And one of those in the East Room, along with a whole collection of celebrities, was CBS News White House correspondent Dan Rather, who's standing by now. Dan?
Barry, for those who watched the ceremony, I doubt that there's a great deal we could add in the way of color, except perhaps to say that as President Nixon walked into the room, the president did look a bit preoccupied with his thoughts. This is not unusual for President Nixon, particularly when he has a speech to make. He is excellent at committing his speeches to memory, or at least keeping in mind the salient points he wants to make, and it could have been that. But the president, for whatever it may be worth, looked a bit preoccupied as he walked into the room. As for Congressman Ford, the representative from Michigan, no one, in my judgment, could have told from Congressman Ford's face that he was to be the nominee as he walked into the room. There was, in the East Room this evening, a kind of fiesta atmosphere among Republicans and Democrats who were present. As you may know, the president invited to hear his announcement tonight members of the diplomatic corps, members of Congress, selected members of Congress, not the entire Congress, of course, members of his cabinet. He also had invited the members of the Supreme Court the Supreme Court members, after considering the invitation, sent back word that they would not be here because they felt that the appearance of it might not be in keeping with the court, and thus they declined the president's invitation. The East Room was about as full as we have seen it any time lately, but there was this kind of fiesta atmosphere. Someone described it as a kind of lottery atmosphere. A lot of chatter in those long minutes before the president walked in about just who it might be. And one Democratic senator was overheard to turn to a Republican senator and say, do you suppose he might reappoint Spiro Agnew? And there was laughter. It was that kind of atmosphere in the room. Quite frankly, there did not seem to be any great amount of surprise that Congressman Ford was, in the end, the man that President Nixon named. A number of people, as they walked into the room, when you ask them, well, who do you think it will be? They say, well, within the last hour or hour and a half, I have become convinced, Mr. Rather, that it will be Congressman Ford. The feel, the tone, the mood of most of the congressmen from both parties who were in the East Room tonight seemed to be that all during the day they didn't have a clue as to who it might be, that most of them seemed to have become convinced sometime between about 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. tonight, Washington time, that the president had indeed settled on Congressman Gerald Ford. Considerable talk in the East Room after the president had announced that Gerald Ford would be his nominee, that Congressman Ford would have no difficulty whatsoever getting through the Congress. He's expected to be approved forthwith, highly popular with members of both parties. And a number of congressmen said that they felt that Congressman Ford was the best possible appointee to keep the 1976 Republican presidential nomination wide open. There were several Southern and Western representatives and senators who indicated that in their opinion, the appointment of Congressman Ford was the best possible thing that could happen to John Connally, the former Treasury Secretary and Texas governor, in that it was widely reported late in the day that Governor Connally felt that if he couldn't have the nomination, that he would prefer to have Congressman Ford. Now, all of that was clearly labeled as the opinion of these various congressmen and senators. I see, by the way, that we have Senator Howard Baker from Tennessee. Senator, good evening. How are you? Just fine. Thank you for coming to our CBS microphone. Reaction, were you surprised?
Well, I guess we'd have been surprised with anyone. It's one of the few really well-kept secrets in Washington lately. And no, I'm not surprised in the sense that all of us had Jerry Ford on our list, I think, and most of us thought that he'd be in the running. I'm pleased. I'm happy with the appointment. I think Jerry brings a happy combination of congressional savvy, of realism, of toughness, of compassion, and eminent confirmability that the president will be well served by now. So I think he chose well.
As always, we like to speak directly but respectfully, but you're aware that Jerry Ford has a reputation among some people, by no means all in this town, of being a very loyal to his party representative, a very hard worker, but not a man with a great potential for the presidency. Would you consider him a potential candidate for 1976?
Well, of course, that's up to the vice president designate, to Jerry Ford himself. If he chooses to contend for the presidential nomination in 1976, I'm sure he'll be a formidable contender. But I got a hunch that we'd better let Jerry settle into that first. And to answer your question, yes, I can visualize him as a very, very substantial contender in 76. But right now I have an idea. His thoughts are turned to the matter of confirmation and to serving well for the balance of this administration's tenure. So I don't know that there's any particular purpose to be served by trying to project ahead to 1976. I would speculate that he'll certainly be in contention. I would speculate that he will be qualified and attractive. I would not speculate beyond that except to say I know Jerry Ford, and I think he'll be a darn good vice president of the United States.
Senator, as you walked in the room tonight, was there any thought in your mind at all that maybe, just maybe, you might be the man?
No, I've never had any thoughts about that. I'm a realist, too, and I've never thought for an instant that I'd be designated as vice president. I intentionally asked my Tennessee colleagues in the Congress not to submit my name in nomination. Some of you in the news service asked me if I were offered the nomination, would I accept it? And of course, anybody would accept it, but I told you then that I thought it was so remote that it wasn't worthy of any serious consideration. So Not only was I not surprised in that respect, but I never entertained any thoughts in that respect. And I think Jerry's a good nominee, and I'm delighted with the choice for the reasons I've already stated.
Senator, thank you very much for coming by. Senator Howard Baker of Tennessee. Senator Baker confirmed what we had said earlier, and what is in fact the consensus of opinion in the Congress among both Democrats and Republicans, which is that Congressman Ford will have no difficulty whatever winning confirmation, and rather rapid confirmation. Dan Rather at the White House. Now back to Barry Serafin in our main studios.
Thank you, Dan. Our CBS News examination of the president's choice will resume in a moment after this message.
For years, Shakespeare struggled to express himself. And today, there are still people trying to figure out what he was talking about. To be or not to be, what does it mean? If he had a big banana, he would have written, I am, take it or leave it. Because you can express yourself with a big banana. You can write, sign, draw, mark, and mainly go crazy. You don't find that kind of expressiveness in a ballpoint. In a ballpoint, you find, wherefore art thou Romeo? In a big banana, you're going to get Romeo. You keep yourself nice. Let's get married. Get a big banana. It comes in 10 expressive colors.
What's up, honey, me? These yellow pages of yours are gorgeous, darling. So easy to find things. Well, what you looking for? Well, I was looking for a new garbage disposal. My old one ate my meatloaf and died. Poor thing. Well, I guess it's true. You can't be a good homemaker and a sex kitten. Why don't you look up a cooking school? Yes, why don't you just chew on your carrots, darling? For fast information about almost anything, let your fingers do the walking through the yellow pages.
Michigan Republican Congressman Gerald Ford is right at this moment being congratulated by many well-wishers at the White House on his nomination by President Nixon to succeed Spiro Agnew as vice president. We heard a moment ago from Howard Baker of Tennessee on Gerald Ford's nomination. There's a statement also from one of Senator Baker's colleagues on the Watergate Committee, Senator Gurney of Florida, who says this is a fine choice which should be universally acclaimed by the American people. Congressman Ford is one of the most highly respected members of Congress in our time. He is extremely talented, a man of utmost integrity. His confirmation by both the House and Senate should go through very speedily and without opposition. Here in the studio with me in Washington is Nelson Benton, who can tell us a little bit more about Gerald Ford. Nelson.
Well, Barry, some vital statistics. Perhaps the most vital one is that Gerald Ford has served in the House for 25 years, which when President Nixon said that, everybody in the East Room and a lot of the informed political ones in Washington knew precisely who he was talking about. Gerald Rudolph Ford, Jr., was born in Omaha, Nebraska, 60 years ago, just over 60 years ago. He lives now in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And as we see him going to take the congratulations of the president and those members of the cabinet and members of the Congress and other dignitaries assembled in the East Room, Ford has been in the Congress for 25 years. He's a graduate of the University of Michigan. He's another lawyer in the administration. Gerald Ford is a graduate of the Yale Law School. He was quite a football player while he was at the University of Michigan, playing center on some championship teams in 1932 and 1933, voted the University of Michigan Wolverines' most valuable player in 1934, and nicknamed during his football years as a center as Junie because an old biography says Gerald Ford darted about the football field like a June beetle. He's married. He has 3 sons and a daughter. He has been very loyal to the president and his leadership in the House of Representatives. He was elected first to the 81st Congress of the United States in 1948.